Welcome to episode 12 of the Creative Train podcast. I took a break for a couple of weeks there during the height of late summer allergy season for me because the idea of trying to speak through allergy congestion into a microphone and recording it was just laughable for me. And speaking of microphones, I am using a new microphone that I got today. It's pretty exciting. I hope it sounds as good, if not better than the last ones. We're going to look at an interesting topic of creativity as self-care. And why does creativity only seem to be a bucket list item for some people? All aboard? Whenever I have a new student in my studio, I like to ask them what brought them to this moment. You know, buying the instrument, signing up for lessons. And the vast majority of my adult students, as if answering from a script, say something like, "It's a bucket list item for me." Whether it was a work schedule for the now retired folks, or school demands or social obligations, learning music or any creative endeavor is too often deprioritized and becomes one of the last things that ever gets our attention. And why is that? I think people too often associate the taking on of new things and the time they expect it to require to become an impediment, and they anticipate feeling guilty for placing their own well-being or following their own motivations or taking up a new hobby or joining a gym. They see this somehow as doing a disservice to their family and friends. Thankfully, stigma is falling around things like self-care and seeking help for mental health issues. And this is certainly a great thing. But all of these forms of self-care revolve around reaching outside of oneself to someone or something, that someone or something else to enact the changes we wish to see and feel. True, we are none of us an island unto ourselves, but we must reach out from time to time in those moments. But why are things like creativity not seen as self-help? I'm not saying that nobody looks upon creative work as beneficial, but it's never really discussed as a legitimate, viable way to achieve not only your own betterment, but also to achieve a whole new level of satisfaction and joy with yourself and your abilities. When you can look at, listen to, or taste something you created and have one of those, "I did that" kind of moments, it's truly a wonderful feeling. I did a little bit of mental health counseling as a patient last winter. And it was interesting to note now in retrospect that I'm composing this podcast, none of the solutions or coping mechanisms or, betterment tactics that the counselor offered had anything to do with looking within myself. There were always other support groups where she encouraged me to go and listen to other people's stories and talk to them. Different kinds of medications that were recommended. And at the time, I was in no place to be terribly analytical about what she was saying, but I just knew that none of that was for me. And now that I'm composing this podcast, I'm thinking back to that and thinking, that would be the first thing that I would recommend to somebody. Get some kind of hobby, something tactile to take your mind off of the things that are bringing you down. I'll always tell people that with a personal investment of 5 to 15 minutes a day, a few days a week, in some sort of creative adventure, you allow your mind to go on mini vacations in which the analytical, schedule and event-based part of your mind simply has little to no influence. Allowing that right brain-centered activity some time for expression and indulgence, you actually generate a serious hit of dopamine that not only gives you that rush of satisfaction and release, but also brings you closer to knowing who you are and what you may have been pushing aside when that part of you that is tied to schedules and spreadsheets and deadlines has to take a back seat to those more subtle energies associated with creativity. There comes a moment when you will experience what we will call the flow. in a creative task. And whether it's a hands-on artistic application like painting or pottery or playing an instrument, or something whole-bodied like dance or gymnastics, or even so far as just having a good workout, there's a moment when the real-world things just seem to slip away. And your busy mind has to take that back seat again. And a new vibe seems to take over your whole demeanor. And this is completely undeniable. If you've ever felt this thing, you'll know that time just doesn't seem to flow the same. Sensory things like taste, color, texture, and harmony become almost like living things with which you're interacting and directing their roles and placements or replacements in real time. This, by the way, I think is where the term flaky artsy comes in. Unless you do this stuff, you can't really understand. And this is not at all like surrendering yourself to some outside influence. This is actually the exact opposite, by which you surrender to yourself, admitting your own creativity into your mind and heart, and allowing those very subtle energies to take the proverbial wheel for a while. Does that sound weird? Maybe, but it's true. I believe that these kind of moments become touchstones for any creator, because you start to touch and discover something which seems otherworldly, but is actually something from deep inside yourself. And there is a kind of bliss in this, an emotional, spiritual, and even physical reaction. It's truly energizing and very deeply humbling to acknowledge and touch that power within yourself. And all it often takes is distracting the busy mind and allowing the more subtle part of us, which exists alongside the obvious part, a little time for expression. So to circle back to a point made earlier, why is creativity placed on the bucket list and not ever really seen as a priority? Maybe because it requires some sort of financial investment without any real specter of making that money back. Maybe we feel self-conscious about becoming a beginner at something and don't want to draw the criticism and judgment of our peers. And I really can't speak on those things with any certainty. It's a very complex thing to try to understand. It's very individual. As I see it, even if your creative efforts only yield things you can display in your own home, and you never have a desire to display anything in a gallery or an art show, do it. Do something. And even if you only want to experiment in your own kitchen and you have no grand dreams of opening a bistro or a restaurant, get in the kitchen and make something. Every time you allow something to hold you back, you allow that thing to take an even deeper rooting in you, and it's less likely to budge in the future. Every time you put yourself down for not being productive enough, you diminish the efforts of all the things you've done leading up to that moment. It's a classic case in my music teaching business that someone will buy an instrument with every good intention and play it for an hour or a day and then leave it alone. It may sit months, it may sit years before they either sell it or recommit themselves to learning. And again, it's often the perceived lack of time that is the reason they tell me they didn't do anything up to this point. Not that they tried it and realized that they don't have the time. They just didn't think they had the time. So with the folks that I know have some sort of sense of humor and wit, I'll ask them point blank, how much time do you spend doom scrolling on your phone after supper? How much time do you spend scrolling through the streaming services, trying to decide what to watch on TV? All of this is wasted time. Time given to fruitless and definitely unproductive things. And certainly very little, if any of that time, is spent exploring something creative like watching tutorials or method videos on your chosen craft. Instead of letting that time go to waste with something that typically leads you to frustration, ennui, or at the best, you're mildly entertained for a few moments, take half of that time and invest it into yourself. If you promise yourself 5 to 15 minutes a day, a few days a week, I can promise you the draw to those otherwise wasted moments becomes less and less. And soon you will start to build momentum in a totally new and ultimately joyful and satisfying journey in your creativity. There's your pep talk. Now go get to work. No more bucket list things with creativity, okay? Promise me? Promise yourself. Allow yourself the time. You don't have to draw a big schedule up. One of the things I like to tell people is don't make a schedule of your entire day and see where you fit time in. Just look at part of your day and say, this is what I'm going to do for myself. When you start doing that, you're going to be a much happier person, much more creative person, and having a lot of fun.